Hey, welcome to our webinar today. We're going to talk about the rise of LLMs and the legal challenges ahead. I'm Brian Geisel. I'm just waiting a little bit while the platform lets some other people jump in. And so I can give you a little bit of an intro here as we're looking at LLMs. I think it's really interesting that recently we've had ChatGPT, which came out a little over a year ago now. And so ChatGPT kind of kicked this off, not in the sense that it was the first LLM, but it was the first big one that people really recognized and saw the use case of and were able to get in and use. You know, we've had stuff like Devon that is allegedly amazing, but nobody's able to use it except the company. And there's some sus in their video that they put out. So there were some things in the video that they said the developer wrote that actually weren't in the Git repository of the code. So it looks like some of that video might have been doctored. So ChatGPT comes out, it's real. And now we're seeing so many things come out. So Meta just released Llama 3 on Facebook and on Instagram, I think 2 days ago now. Of course, Grok came out recently on X, formerly Twitter, which has access to all of the information on Twitter, on X. And so pretty interesting that it's got that context for tweets and it's able to use those. And then you look at Google, which has Gemini. So they upgraded from Bard to now Gemini is out. And Google recently agreed to terms with Reddit to pay Reddit $60 million for rights to train on data for Reddit. So there's a lot happening around the rights. And that one I think we will get into a little bit in the webinar here, is what happens with all of that. And so there's stuff going on with, even if you think about where Grok has access to tweets, that's more real-time info. If you remember the ChatGPT, if you've used that much, and sometimes it would give you answers. I don't have any information newer than, and I think now it's September 2023, but it can now go out and hit up URLs or search the internet. So it can get some newer information to ingest. Grok seems to have some pretty real-time information from Twitter. So that's pretty interesting as well. And then there's Claude, which in some tests has performed better than any of the other major popular LLMs that are out there. And those are all ones that are out that are either free or paid commercial versions of things. But then there's also a lot of open source code that's been coming out where you can run the LLMs locally. And so we've been doing a little bit of that at Geisel Software, where we're actually running some of these LLMs locally, just to say, here's a 500-page document that we want to extract some information from. Give me blah out of this document. And then no one has our data at all. We don't have to worry about any of the data that it trained on, all those kinds of things. And so that's able to run locally, which again is a whole different use of LLMs, or at least different in the sense of not different in the use case of the LLM, but different in that data privacy, data protection, all this kind of thing. So if you're just joining us and just jumping in, I'm just kind of jumped into a little bit of an overview of what's happening in the LLM space right now. So, hey, Keri, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for jumping in here. Why don't we jump into this? And like I said, if you all have questions, throw them in. But without any further delay, let's jump in. So by way of intros, I'm Brian Geisel. I'm the CEO of Geisel Software. We're a software innovator with a lot of interest and some expertise in the transformative power of technology, in AI, in ML, those kinds of things. And so that's kind of our interest here in this spot.
And I'm Keri Sicard, a patent attorney specializing in technology and intellectual property law. It's great to be here to discuss some of the critical legal frameworks that surround the exciting technological advances we'll be exploring today.
So today's session is the rise of LLMs and the legal challenges ahead. And we're going to try to give you a comprehensive view on large language models. We're going to delve into the applications, which are pretty revolutionary, the technological breakthroughs, and of course, the accompanying legal challenges, such as intellectual property rights, privacy concerns, compliance issues, all those kinds of things.
And we're excited to share insights and answer your questions. Please feel free to enter any questions you have in the Q&A section at any time during our discussion. We'll address as many as we can at the end during the Q&A segment of this webinar.
So we're going to have some fun with a real exchange of ideas today. Keri and I have talked about some of this stuff before. We do tech talks here at Geisel Software. Keri's come and given us one on some of the legal challenges, and we've gotten into some really interesting questions because there's a lot to explore here. So our goal is to equip you with a deeper understanding of both the potential of LLMs and the challenges. And so let's dig into this, huh?
Yeah, and if we don't get to your question during today's session, don't worry, we'll follow up offline. We're here to ensure that you receive the information you need. And sorry to be the lawyer in the room, but I have to remind everyone this is just information. This is not legal advice unless you want to follow up with me after the fact, and unless you're Brian and it's offline.
What about mine, Keri? Is mine legal advice?
I sure hope not. And please, while we're at it, please don't rely on the LLMs for legal advice either.
Really good point. It might just be completely wrong.
So before we get, into the weeds, maybe you could explain to some of us that are a little less tech savvy, what is an LLM? What are we talking about here today? How do they work? And just, a little bit in general, high level.
Yeah, I think that's a great start here. So LLMs, of course, stand for a large language model, which probably didn't help us all at all here yet. So it's a form of machine learning or a form of AI, which is based on transformers. Now, transformers have been around, but there are a few things, the proliferation of GPUs and the ability of the access to that power, and we've gotten better at it. And so all that kind of formed this perfect storm where all of a sudden we were able to get into all these LLMs that came out. I think ChatGPT really was the first big one that burst onto the scene. People were able to use it. And before we started the webinar here a little bit, I started talking with folks that were on about all the different LLMs that are out there now. You've got Grok from X, you've got Gemini from Google, they upgraded from Bard, you have Claude, and then just a few days ago, Meta released on Facebook and on Instagram Llama 3. So that's out there now too, all different models with different strengths and weaknesses, these kinds of things. But one of the things about large language models is they're trained on language. And so they aren't trained on logic. They aren't trained on math. One of my favorite things was to ask ChatGPT to give me the first 10-digit prime of E. And it would give me a whole description of what E is and what a prime number is and how you would get the first, and then it would give it to me. It would give me a 10-digit number. And then I would say, is that prime? Oh, no, sorry. Here's another number. And I'm like, is that prime? No, it's divisible by 2. It doesn't really get the number thing, but it gets that it should have 10 digits because it's understanding language. And if you didn't understand what was behind the language, that would look great. And so that's what these models are really good at. They're really good at the language. They're really good at sounding human. But in terms of being correct, they're still working on that part. On the other side of that, what's good with languages is that they're really good at things, and they've put some other businesses out of business because they've been really good at some of the verticals. For example, translation. If you were working on your own model to do translation, Google Translate was kind of the best we had, or one of the best we had at doing translation between different languages. And all of a sudden the LLMs are just way better at it. And so LLMs, again, it's a form of machine learning, really interesting stuff. They're really good at language. They're not so good at logic, but sometimes they're good enough at the language to seem like they're good at logic. How's that?
Perfect.
So why don't we go from that is, I think, and we can dive more into the uses for small business and how people are using them. But let's get the other side of this is, I think a lot of us are already using LLMs in our work, in our daily work, and getting a lot of run rate for our time in those. But what are the kinds of things that we should be thinking about or maybe concerned about as a small business owner with regards to these large language models?
So I think there are a lot of concerns, but the biggest one is just being aware of it and knowing, what you're using with it. Like you mentioned, it's not always correct, I think is one of the concerns. I think a lot of people assume that these LLMs are going to be correct. We've seen cases of lawyers getting disbarred by using made up case names that they just pulled from these. So I think
that sounds like a bad idea.
Sounds like a bad idea. So I think there's this misconception that everything that comes out of an LLM is going to be correct. And like you say, it's training on language, but it doesn't always get it right. And I think the other concern is, if you're using it, it has a lot of great uses, right? I mean, we could go down that rabbit. We could spend the hour just talking about all the wonderful uses of AI, which is great. I want to touch on those as well. But I also want small business owners to be aware. And maybe, if this will just get people thinking a little bit and maybe prevent one business owner from getting hit with a cease and desist letter just because they're thinking about, okay, where did I get this title of this webinar from? Great use of ChatGPT. But take that one extra step. Now plug that name into, a regular, do we still just call it a Google search? I don't know. I need Brian's. This is why I need Brian on here. Just throw it into a traditional web-based search to see if you get something. Does someone else already have this name? You're saving so much time by using these things, which is great, but make sure that you're not making any mistakes or stepping on anyone's toes in doing so. The biggest issue is who owns what comes out of ChatGPT, right? Especially if you're using the free version. A lot of people are using the free version to create content. That's great, but for a small business owner, if you're unknowingly using someone's image or someone's text, the next thing you know, you're hit with a copyright suit, which can have statutory damages of, I believe it's $50,000 per incident. So before you know it, you're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a statutory damage, and you can get legal fees and everything else. That's enough to put a small business out of business. So, do a simple reverse image search, do a simple reverse text search, make sure that what you're using, you're able to use. And then on the flip side, by definition, no one can own what comes out of it. I do want to touch a little bit on the article that you sent to me. Thank you for that. About the gentleman who, Matthew Allen, who had a derivative artwork from originally generated by AI, and he had tried to apply for a copyright and he was denied.
And I think, did he actually win a competition or something with that piece of artwork?
Yes. I mean, if you've seen it, we should circulate the article. It's a beautiful piece. And he talked about how he did over 600 modifications, but the Copyright Office ultimately determined that it was more machine than human. And before I even read the full article, I instantly thought of the monkey selfie, which I think we talked about during our tech talk. In 2018, there was a monkey that took a selfie, and this was a big hot debate as to whether a monkey could have copyright ownership. And it still comes down to it has to be a human. I think the article even kind of joked a little like, the people at PETA may be upset, but a monkey just doesn't have the same rights as a human. So computers and monkeys were it's weird that we're making that analogy, but it still is not a human author. And so the other concern I have for small business owners is that's great what you're putting out of AI, but you by definition may not be able to own that. Even if it's a paid version, because the Copyright Office is telling us if it's originally generated by AI, you're not likely going to be able to protect that.
That's interesting. So then if your copyright case against me is that I stole your work, but if your work was generated by AI, then that might be null and void in the first place.
And well, it's going to come down to how similar they are, right? But that's definitely an interesting argument for sure. It's kind of like the Wild West right now. And I don't like that a lot of things I have to say, I don't know, we don't know. We're talking a lot about copyright because I think that's going to be the fundamental right around artificial intelligence, but there is also trademarks. Someone asked me, well, what if AI generates a trademark? Can I then protect that? Because that's not tied to authorship the way that copyright is. Trademarks are tied to use of the goods or services in commerce. So if you start using a trademark that's generated by AI in connection to real business, does that become protectable? And to my knowledge, we don't know the answer to that yet. So it's very interesting to literally watch as technology advances. The law does as well. And it's just pretty fascinating. So I'd like to get over to some of the exciting applications of these, unless you had any other thoughts on that.
No, that I'll come back to some things there actually. Yeah.
Okay. So what are some exciting applications of these LLMs that you've seen in recent times? And you did touch on this a little bit, but how are you seeing them transform industries?
Yeah. So I think there are so many that I use it for in our own cases, in our own business. And it is so productive. I think overall, one of the things we need to start to kind of get into our minds when we think about how to use AI, how to use machine learning, is that right now it's a really good helper. It's a really great way to help the humans. And so we immediately talk about like, well, is AI going to take over the world? Like, I don't know. Go watch The Terminator. You'll have fun. That'll be a blast for you. But if you want to do something with it, the best use case right now is almost always using it to help people. We're doing some of the fastest warehouse automation in the world at Geisel, but we're not looking at fully automating at 100% automation, and there will never be a human in the loop. Because you start to make mistakes assuming there will never be a human. Now when a human has to go repair it, you run them over with the big forklift robot or something because you never planned what happens when the person's there, right? So don't plan for that 100%. Plan for the 99.9 and go, sometimes the people are going to have to be in here. So put sensors in, these kinds of things to so in terms of like full automation through machine learning, we're getting close, but there's still a lot that the humans are doing. And so I think some of the things we're doing is, first of all, I am horrible at naming things. It's not good. The only time I think I ever did well was my brother was having kids, and his wife was put out for the surgery and that kind of thing, and my brother couldn't be there, and so I got stuck with naming the kids. And so he was like, "What did you name them?" And the girl, I was like, "I named her Denise." And he's like, "That's not horrible." Okay, that's not horrible. He was like, "What did you name the boy?" I was like, "The nephew." So I've been barred from naming things at Geisel Software for obvious or less than obvious reasons. But I actually love using LLMs to name things. And what I do is I feed a ton of context in. I'm doing a podcast episode with this person who does this, and we're going to talk about these things. Give me a short title for it and give me 10 options, right? And it'll take those 10 options. And then sometimes I'll even go, these are my favorite 3 options. Iterate on those. Give me another 10, knowing that those are my favorite 3. So those kinds of things were like, or write this article for me. And then I get it. I'm like, oh, that's wrong. No, so none of that. But it fixes the blank page syndrome issue. So I had something to start with. And now I'm like, oh, and I end up writing stuff and rewriting or tearing it all out. But it gave me like a theme or an idea or this kind of thing. So I find it, the LLMs really good, really good at correcting things. The other great use case that we had here is my executive admin has this list that she manages as an Excel spreadsheet. And every week she has to go through and find whatever 50 people and email them all the status that they have on the spreadsheet or whatever. And so she went out and asked ChatGPT, here's my spreadsheet. And it's not proprietary data. It's not special data. I have a feeling we might be talking about that next. And she said, I want to email these people every week. How do I do it? And it spit out code and it said, this is where you put the code in Google Sheets for it to automatically email. There were a couple of bugs in the code. She asked one of the developers, and a couple minutes later, she had it up and running, was testing it, and she doesn't have a coding background, but all of a sudden she was writing code to have it used in that spreadsheet. And so those kinds of things are, not only do they make us faster at things, but that's something she might not have tried on her own. She might not have gone, let me see if I can code this. And so I think those kinds of things are transformative that we're seeing from, things like LLMs right now.
Yeah. And I think those are best examples of using it properly and having the least amount of concern with stepping on anyone's toes, because you're just using it for ideas. You're using it, like you say, to combat that, oh my gosh, I have no idea what to do. I had a pitch, and actually I'm in a cohort of other patent attorneys, and they said, well, use ChatGPT to give you an outline of what should be in a pitch for a patent attorney pitching to this specific industry. Again, I'm not taking anyone's intellectual property. I'm just getting the LLM to look at other language of what's out there and other presentations and what's been included. Obviously, I'm going to add my own material, but now, oh, yes, that makes sense to have all of these. And, you have it give you a few examples because some are better than others, and you kind of mix them together, but it gives you a good baseline, and it probably saves you, in 5 minutes or less, it will give you an answer that would have taken you a lot more than 5 minutes, even just thinking about it. So when you're getting it to do things faster for you, because coming back to the intellectual property, getting something to do something faster is just not patentable unless you're really doing something unique. So that's where I think you're in the safe zone, quote, again, not saying it's always safe, but safer.
Yeah, right. Are there things that you see people using them for that they're not thinking about are going to get them in trouble? Are there any ones that stick out to you? Like, people keep doing this and that's not going to go well for them.
Yeah, I definitely think the image generation is one thing. It's probably not as problematic, but the bigger concern is for people using the free version. Pay attention to what you're putting in there. I recently had someone who was using it for proofreading their book, and they literally fed their entire book into the free version of ChatGPT. And they're not going to get sued. Nothing bad is going to happen, but ChatGPT may recreate that book and publish it faster than you can. And I don't want to say that your work of art is now worthless, but it's less valuable. And I just think a lot of people don't think about that. And then as a small business owner, I've actually had people tell me, oh, I ended up using a name that ChatGPT gave me that was someone's trademarked or copyrighted term.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you should have just done a simple Google search. And, now they've added that step in. And in hindsight, it's so easy. But, I think that I see it all the time. People just be aware, using someone else's logo without their permission. If I'm putting a flyer out, and I'm working with someone else and I want to put their logo on there, ask them. A lot of people will say, well, I'm selling, Coca-Cola. Can I put Coca-Cola's website, logo on my website? If you have their permission, yes. Otherwise, not likely. I mean, usually they like the free marketing, but not always. Even if you're saying good things about someone, it can actually get you in a lot of trouble. And not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but even from an insurance standpoint, it's considered like brand damage, and a lot of E&O policies will actually cover the legal fees. So someone will end up with the deep pockets to go after you for using their brand. So just little things like that. Always make sure you're giving credit to anything that you're pulling that's not your own.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a practical one of just do the search. Just sure, it came up with a name that could be a great name for a podcast, but if there's 6 other podcasts named that's not going to be good, and it's not telling you that.
Right.
So put in the little bit of extra effort to
exactly
just verify that. I tell people all the time, they say, well, the LLMs can hallucinate. And so hallucinate is the human word we give when the neural network spits out an answer that's great English text. Remember, they're good at languages. So it spits out great English text, but it's just not true.
Right.
It might not be true in any way. And so actually, we were using it to generate a blog post about how you would update firmware. And it was like, this is how you update firmware. And I was like, no, it is not. Not even close. But it must have pulled that from somewhere where it was getting this data from. And so that hallucination, and people have asked me on panels and stuff like, well, how do you deal with hallucination? I'm like, how do you deal with when your neighbor's BSing you? Like, you already do this as a human. You already go, that sounds suspicious. I'm not going to take that at face value. Let me go look elsewhere and find corroboratory something that can corroborate this evidence or this thing that they said, and like, yes, that's true. So the same thing on both of those sides is a little bit of Google search. It goes a long way in verifying the truth of a thing, but also in verifying, like, can I use this? Or even if there's not, I think, a legal issue, but like, if someone else has a podcast name that, it might not be illegal for me to name my podcast that. It's just, but it's not a good idea. It's not going to get me viewers, or those kinds of issues.
Well, and the bigger issue is the other person with that podcast name may have a trademark on it. And
there you go.
You may spend all this time and money and effort. You build the website, you pay for the logo, you drop 10 grand, right, on this name of this podcast. You maybe even record, like, I don't know, a dozen video. You've got everything ready. You drop it out, and then 2 days later, you get hit with a cease and desist letter. You have to rebrand. You have to come up with a new name. And this, a simple search. I know people don't like to pay lawyers, but paying a lawyer $1,000 to $2,000 would have saved you 10 grand. And I that's the one I see all the time in every industry. Restaurants, believe it or not, are the biggest, and they have the most amount of physical stuff with their name on it.
Right.
Like everything, the menu, the aprons, the sign, and I mean, I've never had to purchase a sign. I have, some decals with my logo on it. I don't have a physical location with a big sign. I mean, that just replacing that alone. So I think, too many people just take a name and just run with it. And, like you said, corroborate it a little bit. Not everything coming out of the LLM is true. I mean, if you're in an industry and want to have a fun time, ask ChatGPT some things. You will be amused. I recently asked it, what should you do if you're interested in protecting your ideas? And the first thing it said was to tell everyone that you can. And I love that Brian laughs and gets that joke, because the last thing you want to do is tell anyone. You want to keep it private. for lots of reasons, but how many people are taking that and running with it and either missing out or losing opportunities, So I just want people to be aware of, I think the biggest thing that we keep coming back to is it's just not always right, But go ahead.
Can I ask you about that? Well, first of all, I want to say that's good advice whether you're using an LLM or not. If you came up with a name, still good advice. That's free extra advice not related to LLMs in this webinar today. But can you give just a quick summary on patents and how that changed a little bit with first publication and this kind of thing? And then the question will be like about LLMs with that. But can you kind of set the stage a little bit how that works and how that's a little different now?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So up until 2013, which doesn't seem that long ago, but it has been a bit. But you wouldn't believe how many engineers like myself went, in the early 2000s to school. And
unbelievable, Keri.
Where we had the lab notebooks and you could prove inventorship and all of that. And the US used to really embrace that. But other foreign countries are a very strict first to file system. The first person to file a patent has rights to it. Any public disclosure in any foreign jurisdiction is an automatic bar to patentability. So in the US in 2013, they changed the laws. We used to be a first to invent, and we changed to a first to file. Although it's been 11 years, it's not really something that easily gets out to the engineering community unless they're involved in the patent space. And there are a lot of inventors or engineers just, not in the necessarily unique or novel space. So they're just trudging along, maybe don't know about this change. And so now if you disclose it, you do have a 1-year grace period within the United States with which you can file a patent. But once it's disclosed, you cannot file in any foreign country. That the 1-year grace period in the US does not extend elsewhere. So it's a big, if you're interested in foreign protection, you want to make sure you have something filed before you disclose it. It also starts the clock. And although you do have a year, I always say someone else could take what you've disclosed, copy it, file their own patent. And although there are processes to prove that you were first, they're probably going to be quite a bit more costly than just filing your own patent as soon as possible. So it's really important to make sure that you keep your ideas secret until you have some protection in place, especially if you're a small business. And sometimes when you're starting out, your intellectual property is your biggest asset.
Yeah. So would an LLM, if I'm talking to ChatGPT about this idea, would that be considered public disclosure?
It can be, depending on the type of LLM that you have. So my understanding is some of the paid versions, at least allegedly, don't take your inputs and put them into the, whatever you call the bigger thing. You can clearly see this is Brian's area, not mine.
Yep.
Allegedly, your inputs don't go in there. They just stay within your space. But the free version, anything that goes in is going into that larger LLM. And so those inputs, we don't know where they're going.
Yeah. So to just clarify that, so with ChatGPT, for example, there is a company paid version. So we pay $25 a month per user for this version. And one of the things is it gives us a sandbox where we can make our own GPTs and we can share those between each other, which is a pretty cool feature. But the other one is that they state that they will not use any of the data we put in to train future models or to retrain the model. And so that implies, I think, that they are using the data that might enter in the free version to train the model, which generally I don't care about as I'm asking questions and whatever. Like, I hope it gets better from those questions. And when I like or don't like its answers, I hope it gets better. I want a better LLM at the end. But if I'm putting proprietary company data in, I don't want someone else to be able to derive their answers from my company or personal data. And so that's the part where this company part is paid, and they say they don't disclose that. So that could potentially insulate us from that disclosure in the case of a patent, for example.
Right.
But if you're using the free version, might not.
Exactly. And that not just patentable, anything copyrightable. And even worse, if it takes your idea and someone else's and spits out something even better, has it just knocked you out from having a patent?
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because even though it's language based, I've seen it do some interesting stuff. Now, Keri, you can chide me after our discussion for saying this publicly, but I had a friend who was like, my skis keep getting stolen. Every time I go skiing, my skis get stolen. And it's not because I have amazing skis. It's just because they look like everybody else's skis. So they take those and they run off with them. So it's not really a theft issue. It's a mistake issue. And so she said, ask ChatGPT if it can solve this problem. So I said, okay, well, the problem is we don't want to carry a big lock around and these skis keep getting stolen, whatever. And it said, oh, sure, you could put a mechanism in the bindings that requires you to put in a simple code or something before you could step in and the bindings would accept your ski. That would be easy to do in the binding and whatever. And we're like, that's true. I wouldn't have to carry anything extra. You don't really add any weight for that mechanism. The bindings kind of already do a similar thing. I'm like, that's a great idea. So if anybody's on here and you want to go make that product, have at it. That's
it's in the public domain now.
There you go.
Now Geisel software can't go after the ski binding lock, darn it.
We're out. We're out. Can't get that patent now. But if that was one of our ideas that we had talked about and fed into there, now somebody in the next iteration of ChatGPT could be asking questions about that, and it might go, hey, that thing Geisel software put in here and if that was something we cared to protect, boy, that sounds like a problem.
Exactly.
So let me ask you about the other side of this, which is if I write a book, or if I wrote a book 5 years ago, that's probably in the training set that ChatGPT used to train from. So we've started to get a little bit more color on what ChatGPT used to train from. And by the way, we use ChatGPT, so I'm talking about ChatGPT a lot, and we have some data generally available in the market now about what kind of training data they use. You don't have as much of that information about Gemini or about Claude or some of these things. So I'm talking more about ChatGPT, but these things may well apply to the other LLMs as well. But they allegedly used one of the open repositories, but it is an open, I'm using air quotes, anybody listening, it is an allegedly open repository of copyrighted books for which you must purchase. But it was trained on that information. And so what happens with this, with the legal rights of it training on my book, or data I posted on the internet? Is that different than my book? Just curious your thoughts on that, and what that means for the authorship and or for like the creatives. Like, what does this mean as a creative, that somebody can just take your work, or can they?
Well, that's what's kind of scary right now, is the courts are saying that the and I think it's a little bit of a lack of understanding of how the technology works, but the courts are saying that the LLM training, in air quotes, on this copyrighted material, they refer to it as scraping, which I think is somehow a way of avoiding the word copying, the material to train the LLM. And I mean, the copyright laws say that if you make a copy of copyrighted material without the owner's consent, that is copyright infringement. But the courts are saying that if you're scraping it for training an LLM, that's okay. And it's really creating this fine line. And you have a lot of authors suing OpenAI. OpenAI has even offered to pay your legal fees if you get sued. Wouldn't rely on that in any hurry, at least. But they're so aware of it being a problem, clearly, that they're literally offering to pay for your legal fees. And I think they kind of created this monster that they don't know how to rein it back in. And it's this weird position where you're not having the complete book necessarily spit back out, but sometimes you're having whole chapters, entire, excerpts of it. And so it creates this really messy situation.
Yeah. So this is what I think is interesting from the way an LLM works. And I am enough of a Star Trek fan that I like to carry it all the way forward and go, we had these arguments that Commander Data was sentient, and so he has certain rights. So can I argue my LLM is sentient? I don't know. But and I don't know if we want to get into that. But I think one of the interesting things is that you train an LLM on data in a similar way to the way we learn. I read 10 books and then I write my own book on that topic. As long as I'm not writing the words that those authors wrote, that's totally fine. These are my ideas now, even though I learned so much from these 10 people. I don't actually have their books in my brain. I learned information from them. So LLMs, in a sense, do the same thing in that they use this data to create a neural network. Now, the data is no longer retained. You can get rid of that data. We're not maintaining a copy in the LLM itself. It is just a set of neural, it is a neural net of probabilities created from that data that it ingested. And so what do we do with that? Like, the book isn't in the LLM.
Right. But the human had to purchase the book to be able to absorb it. And I think that's how they're getting around it is, well, the LLM doesn't retain, they don't retain the book, but they do. Yeah. They have it. They possess the contents of the book, and anyone else would have to purchase the book in order to get the contents. So I definitely see both sides of the argument, and it seems like OpenAI is winning, I guess, and able to convince that, training is just scraping and it's not copying. Because it's not a direct copy. Copyright infringement requires a direct copy. It's a training and then a corresponding output. So it's really quite interesting.
And that's where, I don't know, this is fascinating to see where we'll get with it. It's a really good point about I did buy those books, and if I didn't, that's a different legal problem. But legally, I, as a human, right, have to pay for that book, or I borrow it from someone who bought it, or whatever that is, right? But that data was paid for. Is it different, the data that's online? So if I publish a blog or something, because I didn't have to pay anyone to read that blog, is that different than a book that I did have to pay?
Yes, generally speaking. Well, and most blogs are not, they're instantly put in the public domain, right? So most books, and this is, the other side of the debate is, once you put the entire contents of the book into the LLM, now what? Because when you have a physical book or even a digital version of it, you still have to have some sort of token, or you purchase it, or, something in order to get its contents, versus a blog is just out there and available.
Yeah.
So we do have a question in the chat before we get into that. Is there anything else we missed or that you wanted to touch upon?
Yeah, no, let's go ahead and get into that. And
okay, it's says, seems like the free Chat GPT does not have access to the specific content of the book published on Amazon. I think that's true in some cases, but there are, what is that resource that you mentioned before, Brian, where they do have?
Yeah, I forget the name of it, but there is a repository of public books. In fact, my brother self-published a book. Great book, by the way. And he said, like, within a day, the PDF was available online of his book. And so, and he was like, listen, it's not a Times bestseller. This isn't people who are trying to track down my book online and hunting this down. I self-published a book, and now minutes later it's available online. So there is this large repository of all of the books that way that have been published online that I think we're safe to call illegally. They are published books that you have to buy, but there is a PDF you can download without paying for it online. And so yeah, and I don't think that they necessarily from the question posted, I don't think they necessarily pulled every book on Amazon. I'm sure Amazon didn't have any interest to give them access to all of that. But it would seem like any data that they were able to get their hands on, they trained on, which is interesting, right? Because it has this dilemma where I see the use of how good the LLM is today and how much better we expect it to get, how good it is today, largely because of all the data that it trained on. So there's that bias of like, I don't want it to get less good. It's helping me do things faster, better, more efficient. And yet we do need to be fair to people who put, time and effort and all those kinds of things into their work of art or their book or what have you.
Exactly.
Keri, no, go ahead.
I can go to a library and take a book out and it's free, but that doesn't mean I can make copies of it and widely distribute it, right? And that's kind of the analogy that I'm, the real life analogy I'm coming to with these LLMs is the LLM is literally able to basically take out like hundreds of books. I just pictured this like little Energizer bunny running up to the library and being like, joop, 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 joop. Like every book, it just like sucks all the info out of it really fast. And there's technically nothing illegal about it. And it's not making a direct copy. So it's literally just in this weird, in between. And that's basically what it's doing is it's not doing anything illegal. It's scraping one copy, quote, scraping a copy, and then it's manipulating it or using it for learning purposes. But by, the end result is sometimes it spits part of that back out. And how do we allow for the advancement of this amazing thing while still protecting people's rights? It's such an interesting area.
Right. So one of the things that happened recently that I think is interesting here is that Google spent $60 million on the rights to train on Reddit's data. So it's not clear yet if that's one time or if that's 60 million annually, but I think it's fair to say a lot. They paid $60 million, and Reddit has, if I do the calculations, how much data? Reddit has a lot of data. And so, technically speaking, so that fits. So, I don't know if that has legal implications or if that's just more of a trend in the industry that we'll see how it plays out. What are your thoughts on that, on paying for that data then?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that necessarily changes anything. If anything, it, now they've paid for it. So you're kind of free to do what you want to with it. And if the court's already said you're just scraping for the data, I think that it's probably going to be fine, which is it just feels icky. I don't know how else. Like it
Yeah.
feels weird that one, I know it's not a person, it's an LLM, but it feels like it's just taking on the shape of one entity. And that's just strange because it's able to do so many things and spit out all this data to so many different devices and users and all these things. And where do we draw the line? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm curious to see if we'll see something like authors kind of banding together and saying, here's how much we'd like to charge for you to
Mm.
our data. And so, hey, we can still make some money on you using this book to train on. And it's different than selling books. So what's that worth? What's an author willing to take for that? What is an LLM willing to pay to train on it? I don't know. I don't know how the economics might work on that. But I wonder if we'll see that kind of with content creators will kind of start to get together. I mean, in a sense, Reddit sold our data. Like that was
Mhm.
my rant about how angry I am that my Snickers bar came opened or whatever it is that we're talking about on Reddit, right? It's probably not that. Uh, and but my guess is that Reddit's um, usage language, or you can fix me on, but like their privacy policy and end user license agreement for using Reddit, this kind of thing, probably includes some language that allows them to sell that data on to Google. They say if the platform is free, you're the product.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
I think it'll be interesting to see, sites that own that data can sell the data as a whole, but I wonder if we'll see some things of content creators that maybe come together in some interesting way to say, okay, here's the price to train on this. And if we'll start to see the models develop in that way, that it starts to become not just how good is your model, but what data was it trained on, and do how important does it become to people to kind of show that history and the legality of the data that we trained on.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, we only have a few minutes left, but that's where you sometimes get into patentable subject matter too, is how are you training it? The iterations and what data you're providing and how you're using that to train the LLM. So that's probably another webinar for another day, but
Yeah, no doubt.
very cool.
No doubt.
Um,
Uh,
okay, I think that's it for questions. Looks like we have a few minutes left. I don't know if you can think of anything else.
I have a favorite
Um,
use case of
oh,
LLMs
yes,
that I'd love to
please.
share,
Yeah, please
which
do.
is just, how when you go buy something on Amazon, like socks, that just 50,000 people bought this thing or whatever it is, something that's super, super popular. It's not really niche. And the first thing I want to do, right, is I want to go in and I'm like, okay, I need some thin socks or whatever it is you're looking for. And now there's 50,000 reviews. And I want to find out, are these socks thin enough? Do people hate that they're thick, or are they actually thin? And so I start like randomly reading reviews and like, oh, that guy didn't like that they were the wrong color pink because they didn't match his company's logo. That wasn't me that wrote that review or anything. And then somebody else was, whatever, these random things in these comments, and you're trying to get a sense of like, does everyone kind of say, but at least they're nice and thin. And so what Amazon did is they used an LLM to read the reviews of a product, and it's super useful when there are a lot. And then at the top they say, this is what customers feel, and I think they even have a little tag that says generated by AI. So like, note to the user, this might have been made up if the AI was hallucinating today. But I found
Love
them
that.
really, really good, and they save me time. Again, this is what I like about AI and ML. It saves me a ton of time because that's exactly what I was going to do. I was going to read a crap ton of reviews and get a sense of which thing does what it was I was looking for. And so that's one of my favorite uses that, I'm not paying for. They're making their product better. Amazon's making it faster for me to shop on their site. I really like that one. It just summarizes it in exactly the way I'm looking for. I just want to know if people think they're thin socks or not.
I love that. And it looks like we have one more question in the Q&A. Do you recommend use of open source LLMs? Is there any concern on what data was used to train these LLMs? I think we touched on this a little bit, but I think they're okay to use for general task management or procedure generation, or maybe idea generation, naming of things. But just be mindful of not only, if it's open source, generally whatever goes in is going in to the larger LLM, and the data that's used to train them, the concerns about copyright that we touched upon, I think. Would you have anything to add to that, Brian?
Well, just for people to be aware that open source means the source code on the code for the, I don't want to say the model, but the code that they're using is open source. You can read that code. OpenAI has made a bunch of their source open, and then there's some hubbub about the whole thing. But that doesn't mean that their model or their training data was made available. So those are separate things. So you could take an open source LLM, you can just download it to your computer. And so we actually did this the other day, as one of my engineers grabbed one of the open source LLMs, threw it on his machine, used his GPU to process. We had a 500-page document with a bunch of interesting things about AI. So it's AI reading about AI, so on. It's very meta. And so is that a problem? Is Meta going to sue me because I said the word meta? Is that so but he did it just on his computer, and he actually said, I even unplugged the Ethernet. So there's no way it's getting anything from the internet. It's not interchanging any other thing here. But it was able to read the document and then say, we asked a bunch of questions, like, based on this 500-page document, here are our questions. And it spit out really good answers to it. So that's an open source model that is, we're able to use internally. That data is not going anywhere. That's one thing. OpenAI saying, if they say ChatGPT is open source, that doesn't say anything about their training, how they trained it, what they're doing with your data as it trains. So just don't conflate those two things as you're thinking about LLMs. Open source, when we think about open source software, we're like, oh, all the software is open, I can see all of it. That's not true with a machine learning model, because you can see all the code, but the aspect of ML is the code you use and the data you use to train the model. And so that doesn't mean their model is open. I wouldn't call it open source, but that doesn't mean their model is open. So just be aware of that when you're thinking about open source, is it does have a little bit of a different context when we talk about LLMs in that way. I hope that makes sense.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. So this has been great. Keri, any closing thoughts?
No, I feel like we really, touched on quite a bit of stuff. Just double checking my notes. This was great.
Yeah, and thanks for the questions. Thanks for everybody's participation. If you have additional questions, or you were afraid we were going to answer your question out loud, feel free to send it offline. And it seemed like we had really good participation and folks hanging around here. So if there's more interest, or you have questions that you think would take us an hour, and that's thanks for not putting that in the Q&A. But if you have those, send them on to us, because there's nothing to say we couldn't do another 201 webinar and dive deeper into some of these elements or aspects or those kinds of things. And so I'm sure Keri and our information will be available here. If you'd like additional legal advice, please reach out to Keri. We actually use Keri for all of our IP, and she has been just absolutely amazing for that. And of course, if you're trying to figure out some AI ML pictures, LLMs or not, Geisel Software is happy to have that discussion. So we hope this helped you. I hope you guys were able to learn a ton from it, and look forward to, maybe we'll end up doing another one.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brian. This was great. And
Awesome.
thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Keri. Appreciate having you on. This is so great.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.